New alarm bells ringing tonight on the coronavirus outbreak in this country.
Doctors say the virus is spread through droplets when someone coughs or sneezes.
And I think the business community, it's in their interest that people actually stay home and stop the spread.
For a business that can allow more employees to telecommute, we want you to do that.
Hi, friends. I'm Andy Paul, host of the Sales Enablement podcast, and I want to encourage you to listen to my brand new special 6-part podcast miniseries titled Selling with Purpose. The team behind Sales Enablement podcast and I put together this incredible series of inspiring conversations exploring what it means to sell with a mission greater than just hitting your numbers in this era of COVID-19 and beyond. So tune in to hear from world-class enterprise sales leaders and learn how their 6 companies will close $50 billion selling remotely. See how they've supported essential workers with the products and services they need to stay safe and thrive during this time of crisis. Subscribe to Selling with a Purpose now on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Guided Selling from RingDNA makes your entire sales team more effective by revealing exactly what reps should do and when to do it. Guided Selling works by transforming sales data into a curated list of prioritized sales actions. So when reps start their day, they'll never again wonder which prospects and accounts or hot inbound leads to reach out to next. Guided Selling even shifts reps' priority in response to real-time buying signals. Finally, even new reps can sell like seasoned ones. Let RingDNA be your guide to success. Learn more at ringdna.com/guided selling. That's ringdna.com/guided selling.
The magic in the team meeting is bringing out the bigger issues about a campaign. So what are the things that we need to solve as a team that might be getting in our way? And so that's our time to really strategize. Maybe there's a certain buyer persona we're going after that we're just either not finding the right messaging or they might be the wrong person, right? So we'll listen to some calls. We'll really tackle bigger issues, macro issues in that team meeting so that we make sure that every week, as a team, we're looking strategically at the count and figure out things that we can do better.
Hi, friends. Welcome to the Sales Enablement Podcast. I'm your host, Andy Paul, and that was David Kreiger. He's the founder and CEO of SalesRoads. And David's joining me today on Sales Enablement, episode 792, to talk about how to work remotely. His sales outsourcing company has always been a remote-first workplace since it was founded in 2006, and he's now grown to over 70 sellers on staff. And David and I are going to dig into his 4 essential building blocks for how to effectively work remotely and how to manage remotely as well. These include building a culture of trust and accountability, why employees go the extra mile when they're personally accountable for performance, how to communicate. We'll dig into the critical meeting rhythms that David implements with his teams and the best practices he uses around how to actually communicate with people remotely. We'll talk about how to boost morale and combat loneliness, because that's certainly one of the potential impacts of working remotely. And we'll talk about how to create a professional at-home office environment. So we'll dig into all that and much, much more. But before we get to David, I want to remind you to subscribe to this podcast wherever you listen to it. And if you subscribe, we'd certainly appreciate it if you could also give us your feedback about how we're doing in the form of a review. So thank you very much for that. And if you haven't already connected with me on LinkedIn, please do. That's linkedin.com/in/real_Andy_Paul. That's right, real Andy Paul. All right, let's jump into it. David, welcome to the show.
Great to be here, Andy.
It's a pleasure to have you. So where are you joining us from today?
So from sunny, warm, getting to be sweltery hot South Florida.
Ah, okay. Yeah, it's about that time of year.
It's getting there. Usually we leave to go to Colorado in about a month to get out of the heat, but it's not happening this year for obvious reasons.
So you spend like the summer in Colorado?
We do. To get out of the heat, get a little hiking, get in the mountains, that type of stuff.
Nice. So do you have kids at home?
I do. So 8 and 5, so little ones.
And how are they enjoying online school?
So they miss their friends, so they would love to be back. And I think mommy and daddy are harder teachers than their school teachers and are a little more critical. So I think,
surprising.
I know. So they, I think, would like to have a little bit of relief from the homeschooling.
Yeah. And how about you and your wife, right? To have some relief from each other?
Yes, though it has been fun to relearn second grade math and some of the basic social study things that you learn at that time that I have actually forgotten about rock formations and things like that. So it can be kind of fun.
Well, yeah. On my side, it's we're here in New York, as most people know, they're listening, but it's I think maybe my estimation in the eyes of my wife has gone up because she said, you've worked from home for 20 years. I've had my own business. I've always worked from a home office. And it's like, yeah. And she was like, after the first week was like tearing her hair out. It's like, how do you do this?
I know. Yeah. People can get my company is 100% remote. So we're used to that part of it. But usually don't have the kids at home. And that's been fun. We've, learned to embrace, at least on my end, doing an interview like this or other things where they come and jump on my lap and we just have to have fun with it and roll with the punches.
Oh yeah. I mean, that's what I try to tell people is when we're doing these types of things, you're doing a Zoom call or whatever the dog shows up, the cat shows up, somebody walks behind you. It's like, yeah, so what? It's just like people are like, oh, we're trying to be professional. It's like, no, by definition, yes, you can be professional in your demeanor and so on, but you're human. Something happens, life happens.
Yeah, and it can be fun. I mean, my team and even now some clients have gotten to meet my little kids, and they've enjoyed it. And my kids sort of wave to them and hey, listen, we're all humans, and it's part of it. So you got to embrace it and have fun with it, because actually, if you look at it through the right lens, it's actually kind of a fun aspect of getting to see them throughout the day and things like that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So yeah, when I'm in my San Diego office and my producer, my son Alec, is his dog's in residence at that time. She becomes the podcast dog. So. All good. So you mentioned about your company, SalesRoad. So what does SalesRoads do?
So we are a SDR outsourcing company. So our clients look to us mainly when they are looking to accelerate their sales through top of the funnel opportunities. And either they've built an SDR team in-house that they're looking to augment, or they've struggled with the SDR functionality and building top of the funnel opportunities for their AEs. And so we come in and we become really part of their organization as their outsourced inside sales SDR company, basically just managing all aspects of the top of the funnel opportunity work for our clients.
So it's not, an uncrowded field. I mean, there's many more companies sort of getting into that. So what are you doing to differentiate yourself versus what other sort of outsource SDR function companies are doing?
Yeah, so there's really two things that we've done. One that some other companies do, but we really work with our companies in a very intimate way, where we really come into their organization, we become part of their organization, we work with their marketing team, we're part of their sales meetings, they're part of our sales meetings, and we really work hand in hand with our organizations, with our client organizations, and we find that that's really the best way to create some amazing opportunities and develop learnings, both from a marketing standpoint, from a sales aspect. And so that's one thing that we do differently than some organizations. The other thing, which is a little different now, but I think we still approach it in a different way, is I started the company 13 years ago as a 100% remote organization. So at SalesRoads, we really have focused on recruiting the best sales talent wherever they live, and really recruiting SDRs that are later stage in their career, versus the model of bringing SDRs out of college.
Define later stage. I mean, later stage of their actual careers, or?
Correct. Yeah, so It's twofold. One, either they've really built their career in prospecting, so they've always been doing prospecting, and this is what they love to do, and they might be in a different point in their career where they want to be able to work from home, or maybe life has taken them to a certain area where there isn't as much opportunity. They want to be able to work for, we have an amazing SDR who is on a farm. She worked for a farm, but she's amazing talent. And, there weren't as many opportunities for around there. And we got the opportunity to get to work with her because of the remote environment. And so on average, our SDRs have 14 years of sales experience. So instead of just coming out of school, they've been working either doing prospecting for their career or have been in sales and maybe were AEs, maybe were traveling around, and they would prefer to have a more stay-at-home lifestyle and not have to do the full sales cycle and just really focus on what they actually love, which is the prospecting part.
Well, don't you think this is so? I think there's rampant ageism in sales and SDRs in particular, and it's really rare to hear about companies that are prepared to hire what I call career SDRs. Mm-hmm. There's this implicit thought, if not explicit in some places, that you get in your 30s, you're just too old to do this job. It's a tough job. It's like come on, you got these people who know how to become more proficient at it. Why are we tossing them aside? I recommend companies go find people in their 50s and 60s that can do this.
Absolutely. And one of the biggest pain points that a lot of our clients who have built it internally and have struggled is that, revolving door we continue to hear about with SDRs, both on the side that somebody comes out of school and doesn't realize how difficult this work is. And you have to have a certain type of mindset to really enjoy it and thrive on it, because it is very exciting in many ways, but you have to have that right mindset. But then also the folks that really do thrive in the SDR role, a lot of times want to get promoted to being an AE. So on average, I think it's about 14 months people stay in this role. Right. And so our clients really find that's difficult when you're investing in training and things like that to have such a revolving door. And so one of the things that by recruiting somebody later stage in their career, like we've done, we've been able to keep people for long periods of time at SalesRoads, invest in their training, and really it's been a win-win because we don't get that revolving door, and we can get a greater return on the training investment we put into our team.
So I guess the question would be there's a trade-off on the part of the company. The decision they're making about whether to outsource this or bring this function in-house is, that perhaps a perception that some knowledge, right, some learning, some lessons, and so on, just doesn't get passed through the organization because it sort of resides outside the company. And so, how are you dealing with that? And I've seen it before with companies that outsource certain functions, say, oh, no, we're really losing something by not having that integrated into our team. Let's bring it in.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it's really something that's important. And I think in some ways, just even build on that, and then I'll answer the question, the SDR function can be looked at as the most important function in an entire company, especially for early stage startups, because we are the window to the prospect, or even the potential prospect. As companies, we work with a lot of early stage SaaS startups, and they're trying to figure out that they might have an idea of who their target are, but you got to kind of test it, right? And you got to go out and have those conversations, and we are the entry point to that. And so I'd even argue a lot of times executives, the CEO should be getting on the phone, especially at early stage startups, as an SDR, because of the amount that you can learn. So the reason that we've been able to make it work goes back to the first point that I talked about, is to really do this well, both to create the right types of opportunities and appointments for the AEs, but also to not only have the knowledge transfer, but also to be able to pivot, pretty quickly and make adjustments. Is, you've got to incorporate yourself into the organization as if you are an internal department. And you've got to be able to have regular meetings. We're on our client Slack. We're not only meeting with, the person who's managing us, we're also meeting with the marketing team. We're filtering back information on a regular basis as far as what data they're looking for in reports and call recordings. And the back and forth communication is so critical. And if you do it more, what I would say kind of like a vendor model, where you're just booking appointments and sending them over to the AEs, and that's kind of just your responsibility. You might book some good appointments for them. They might get some opportunities, but you lose everything that you just talked about, which is so critical for an organization to be able to get the learnings, to be able to pivot to potentially a different market, to be able to iterate the language. So, for what's working. We might stumble upon a certain way of framing something or saying something to a prospect that marketing should pick up on, right? Internally and vice versa.
Sure.
And
Absolutely.
so you've really got to put yourself within the organization, which is what we do with our clients to make sure that knowledge transfer happens. And then, the reason why a lot of our clients will at least initially do it with a company like ours is that it is very difficult to build and to do right and to make sure that you don't have that revolving door. And so our clients really love the fact that we can really take over that aspect of this for them as they are trying to scale their company. Really, they can trust us to build this right, to use the best practices. They don't have to think about that. They can really be working on their product, working with their AEs, working on the marketing, and it's one less thing that they have to worry about. And then at a certain point, if they grow to a certain scale and they want to bring in somebody to really manage this department and grow it, we've worked with our clients on that type of transition. But really, at a smaller scale, it's hard to do this well unless you really invested in bringing the talent to manage something like this internally.
All right. So if you're running a sales team and you say, okay, look, we're going to outsource this functionality, what are you seeing? What is sort of that point in time? Is it once the SDR team reaches a certain size, or what's driving the decision to bring it back inside? It
varies. I mean, we've been with clients through forever, and they stay with us just because they want to. But there are certain times, So there isn't a perfect timing, but I'll say at the time where they're willing to invest in an executive level person to really manage the SDR team, not necessarily, that's when you can take it in-house. But if you don't have somebody really managing it and knowing how to build a high-producing SDR team, more often than not, either your team isn't going to be hitting their quotas, they're not going to be doing well, or it's going to be taking time away from either the CRO or somebody else within the sales team to manage this part-time, which isn't the most effective use of their time when they're trying to really scale the company.
Okay. No matter where your sales team is working from, RingDNA can enable them to be more productive and effective. RingDNA offers a complete platform for remote sales teams that gives reps the tools they need to connect with more prospects and create more opportunities and drive more revenue no matter where they're working from. And managers can get real-time insight they need to coach reps to success. Win more deals from anywhere on the planet with RingDNA. Learn more about how RingDNA helps remote teams at ringdna.com/remote work. That's ringdna.com/remote work.
New alarm bells ringing tonight on the coronavirus outbreak in this country.
Doctors say the virus is spread through droplets when someone coughs or sneezes.
And I think the business community, it's in their interest that people actually stay home and stop the spread.
For a business that can allow more employees to telecommute, we want you to do that.
Hi, friends. I'm Andy Paul, host of the Sales Enablement Podcast. And I want to encourage you to listen to my brand new special 6-part podcast miniseries titled Selling with Purpose. The team behind Sales Enablement Podcast and I put together this incredible series of inspiring conversations exploring what it means to sell with a mission greater than just hitting your numbers in this era of COVID-19 and beyond. So tune in to hear from world-class enterprise sales leaders and learn how their 6 companies will close $50 billion selling remotely. See how they've supported essential workers with the products and services they need to stay safe and thrive during this time of crisis. Subscribe to Selling with a Purpose now on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you listen to podcasts. All right, well, what we're going to transition ourselves here is because what we really wanted to get into was working remote and managing remote teams, high-performing remote teams. And I don't know, I'm looking at the landscape of what's going on, and I don't know, this is not a genius insight or anything, but we're certainly going to see remote work, I think, being a more permanent part of the landscape. And as you said, you've worked remotely since the beginning, so we wanted to touch on some of that. But are you seeing that as well?
Yeah, so we are. I mean, I think it was Twitter that just said that they're now going to be a 100% remote company or you have the option to be a 100% remote company. And so I think all companies are going to be at least considering this, which is something, when I started this SalesRoads 13 years ago, people thought, there were companies doing remote work, but it was much more of a crazy concept. This has made it standard, and people realize that if done right, and we'll talk about some of the things that I think are important to do it right, it can be very powerful and can even be sometimes a better way to really, build your business and find great employees and make them more productive. So I do think, Andy, absolutely, this is part of our landscape. It's sort of we've been seeing remote work increasing over the past few years, and this is a tipping point where we're going to see a lot of companies either, like Twitter, say we're going to go completely remote, or have to have a strategy where there is remote work incorporated into the culture and into the guidelines for how their employees can work.
Yeah, well, I think the first thing you think about in a sales perspective is the value of having a sales floor where, and I think back to the beginning of my career, working on a big open sales floor for a handful of years. It was like, there are a lot of things I picked up in that environment, not just lessons learned about sales, but culture, friendships, things that have had benefits later on in my career. Do you ever find like you're missing that with your company being fully remote?
So the short answer is no, but you have to do it in the right way. And you have to those are still things that are really important to a company, having cross learnings, right? Having great relationships with your fellow employees. But if you think about it and you really work on it, those things can be recreated in a remote environment. And we've seen people doing that. We've seen a lot of the things that people are doing, but there are lots of ways to recreate some of those things that you just outlined, Andy, in a remote environment while taking advantage of the power of remote work. And I think sometimes the increased productivity you get from remote work. Sure.
But it seems like one of the hard things to replicate and is the spontaneity, right? Is the water, quote unquote, water cooler conversations, sitting in the lunch break. To me, that's where the information is really passed. And I just look at like my wife's schedule for her work. And the joke is, because it's booked from like everybody these days, booked. They feel like they're working harder in lockdown than they did beforehand. But I think part of the contributors to that is, or one of the contributors to that is that the spontaneous meetings have all become scheduled. It's so hard to have these spontaneous sharing of knowledge if you think, well, let's schedule Zoom to chat with somebody.
Mm-hmm. So let me address that in two ways. So one, yes, you're right. The true spontaneity, as you outline, and bumping into somebody in the hallway, right? Or looking over your cube desk and or hearing something on somebody else's call, you can't completely recreate that in a remote environment. However, you can give opportunities and create a culture where a lot of those types of things can happen. So for instance, I think a lot of companies have been doing it. We've been doing it for a number of years. We have a Slack channel just called Water Cooler, right? And where you post a question, you get people to engage with each other, and people have a lot of fun with it. And there's a lot of spontaneity, as far as a communication back and forth just through that water cooler channel. And it's encouraged, right? It's encouraged to go sit around the quote unquote virtual water cooler, and you get that. The other thing we encourage is for people just to call their coworkers, just have a conversation, right? Just pick up the phone. It doesn't have to be about work. Yes. Right?
What are you talking about? We're in a generation that doesn't call and doesn't talk. They text.
Well, they can text too. They can Slack each other, right? But just get, make sure that people are connecting socially within a remote environment. And over those conversations, it's great. Now, this is also prepared, but there's a great little app called Donut, which on Slack, all of our team uses, and it sets up 15-minute little conversations on your calendar once a week with just a random person across the company. And yes, cheers. It's not like bumping into somebody, right? But you get to talk to different people throughout the company. So you can create that. And yes, it's not the same thing, but I also would argue that though there is a lot of great spontaneity and conversations and knowledge sharing, there's also a lot of time wasted too with some of those types of things. Where you get into a conversation, you might, be really trying to focus on something else. And you don't want to be rude, or you just are pulled into certain meetings because you're there and things like that don't happen in a remote environment. So you're never going to have a perfect recreation, but I think as long as you understand the importance of some of the things that you're trying to foster and you don't want to lose in remote work, you can find ways to encourage those to happen and embellish the positive aspects while minimizing the negative aspects.
And Donut is a Slack app, or it's just a...
It's a third-party app that integrates with Slack.
Yeah, that's what I meant. Yeah. So, just DONUT? Or
just like Donut, like have a donut, have coffee, 15-minute coffee with coworkers, basically.
I think that's very clever. I like that. Well, I mean, that really feeds one of the primary themes you talk about, which is that communication becomes even more important, obviously, in a remote work environment. And that you just can't replicate what you're doing before, as you have to think differently about it.
Yeah, and I think that's going to be probably the number one challenge for companies, going back to your earlier point, as they're thinking about this tipping point with remote work. I would say it's easier for us as a 100% remote company to build our processes, our culture, our way of communicating around remote work, because we have one way that we communicate, and that's remotely. So we can think about that, and we have our different building blocks of how we do that, in a rigorous way. When people, and most of the companies, I think, are going to have both remote workers and office workers. And that will be a harder challenge to solve.
Some may feel disadvantaged if they're not where the action is.
Exactly. So I would encourage the leaders managing that transition to think about that, and think about, how you make that transition. And we'll talk a little bit more about how we do it in a 100% remote environment. I think there will be some good lessons and learnings over the things that we've done over the last 13 years. But I do acknowledge it will be slightly different for companies who are trying to manage this by doing both. And it will have its own unique set of challenges.
Yeah, well, we see this in the way we're implementing sales process and tools and technologies, is that by and large, you look at the way people implementing technology is, they're basically automating what they were doing before. And then wondering, well, why aren't we getting improved results out of this?
Right, exactly. It's a good analogy.
Yeah. So it's really a problem. I was just going to go through, I was thinking of some of the practices you have. So you have a daily huddle, and companies do this. I'm a big believer in this, a stand-up meeting at the beginning of the day, 5 minutes, 10 minutes. But you seem to have really sort of streamlined that, because you're talking about doing it as little as 3 minutes. So what takes place in this daily huddle?
Yeah, and I think the daily huddle is really important. It's critical in a remote environment, and I think to your point, it can be used in a regular environment, and it's important just to make sure you've got constant communication. And so, what we do is we have it's one time of the day, in different, every team has their own huddle with their team lead, and we start off, first.
Well, first of all, how big is your sales team?
So we're about 75 total.
Okay, all right. And how are the teams set up? Are they geographic or by account? Or?
By account, by different clients. Okay. So it's huddle by client.
Huddle by client, okay.
And so what we do is we have a very quick check-in, one word, and that's one important thing also in a remote environment. You just want to always be able to check in on your team, because you can't see them, right? You don't see their body language as they're walking through the hall and things like that. You want to just know where they are, right? Quick one word, check-in, and you can kind of hear from either the word choice or the way they say it. The leader just needs to be in tune to how that person's feeling. Do they have energy? Do they not? And keep that in mind. You might want to take something offline, because you just got to know how your team is doing in a virtual environment. Then they shout out their key KPI for the day. Usually it's, number of appointments they're going to hit for that day. And then if any, and this is another critical thing, and probably the most important part of the daily huddle, is anyone stuck on anything? Because both in a regular environment, but especially in a remote environment, if there are blockers, if there are things that whether it's a lead list or maybe a certain objection or things like that, if you can get that, have an opportunity to get that out of the way and solved on a daily basis, in a team setting, it just allows your team to pedal faster. And so that is, anyone stuck on anything is so critical in that huddle. And if it's something really quick, you can solve in the huddle. Otherwise, you just take it offline. Otherwise, you obviously can't stick to the 3 minutes. So,
and in those huddles, because they're organized by account, is the account liaison or whatever that person is, are they in that as well? The person that works for your customer?
So the client isn't in there, if that's what you're asking. So the coach who is coaching that account, those SDRs on the account, is the one who leads it each day.
Okay, got it. All right, so you have your daily huddles, which again, great idea. Your weekly team meeting. So I presume outside work hours, you have a longer timed meeting, if you will.
Exactly.
And so what's the agenda for that?
Yeah, so that will go more deeply into the KPIs. So we always anchor ourselves with metrics. How are things? How are we doing? Going towards quota as a team, by individuals, looking down at some of the sub metrics as far as conversations, conversion rates, touches. So we ground ourselves in the metrics, and then we talk about our key priorities for the week. It can be grounded in metrics, but it could be part of something that we took out of a coaching session. What are the key things that we're working on personally? And then the magic in the team meeting is bringing out the bigger issues about a campaign. So what are the things that we need to solve as a team that might be getting in our way? And so that's our time to really strategize. Maybe there's a certain buyer persona we're going after that we're just either not finding the right messaging, or we're not targeting in the or they might be the wrong person, right? So we'll listen to some calls. We'll really tackle bigger issues, macro issues in that team meeting, so that we make sure that every week we're looking, as a team, we're looking strategically at the count and figure out things that we can do better as a team.
How about training? How do you integrate that? And so again, just for people to sort of make sure they're keeping the right focus on this, these are best practices for working remote, because, hey, with you managing your sales team, because new reality that's coming, that we'll always have some fraction of what we're doing remote.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So if there is some training maybe on a new product or service that that might take place there, or maybe there's a new technique that we're using company wide or things like that, we could fit that into that discussion area. But the ongoing training is in the weekly coaching sessions, usually with the coach, where they're really going deep and listening into one-on-one calls and things like that. And that's where most of our training, our one-on is in that one-on-one.
In your one-on-one.
Correct.
Right. And when do you hold? And this is an important question I'd sort of brought before, but when do you hold your weekly meetings? Because this is it's so important that to get good participation in the meeting, to get people to be engaged in it. My belief, as my experience has always been, is that A, you have to take it outside selling hours, and B, is you have a really tightly defined agenda, and you got to follow the agenda and stick to the time frame that you set out for it.
Yeah, so we have a very strict agenda and time allocated to each slot. So absolutely, so we stick to that. As far as because we have people usually on different coasts and things like that, we do usually do it in the middle of the day, which isn't necessarily the best time, but it's just to sort of accommodate for different schedules, and usually in the middle of the week. So we've got sort of a part of the week where we've got some things that are fresh, and then we can implement them for the rest of the week.
You say that one of the things that you make a habit of, and this is interesting, is you make sure you record all those weekly meetings.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
And so do you have them transcribed? I mean, how do you distribute the recording or transcription to the team? Yeah,
so two ways. One, we put into Otter so that anybody can search for something. I don't know if you use, so that's a great tool, and then you can just search and look up everything. And then we also have the video portion because, just in case anything was shared and people want to look at it, they can just access the video. And we just have that all on a little Dropbox area, and the Otter is just emailed to them.
And so do you find that people actually using the recording or using the transcription?
I mean, it's there in case they want to go back. I think that as long as they're attentive during the meetings, it's not as important, right? And they can take some of any of the key lessons or key things can be reinforced in the coaching session. So it's there if they need to go back and look at it. And maybe there was an objection we talked about and they just want to kind of go to that game tape, but it isn't, necessarily something we don't want them to be re-listening to the whole thing. That's kind of a waste of time, right?
Well, I just wonder if they were like, a coach says, well, in the meeting you committed to X, Y, Z, and
anything they commit to.
I think you misunderstood me.
Yeah, well, you can go about it. Yeah, but any of their commitments, first of all, usually their commitments are based upon what their KPIs are and their quota. So that's all been hard coded for the month anyway. And so, we can look right at the dashboard and see where they are and what they need to be able to do for the remainder of the month.
And so you refer to your team leader sort of as coaches. So what background do they have? And this is the reason I bring this up is I'm an increasingly vocal advocate for the fact that I don't think managers should coach. I think you should have coaches on your team that coach your sellers, because most managers are reluctant to dedicate the time to it, and they're not very good at it, quite frankly. So who do you have as coaches?
So they were all SDRs before. So and they came up through the organization. They've been with us, so we have very low attrition. So a lot of the coaches have been with SalesRoads for 8, 9, 10 years. So, they've come up, through the system. They've proved themselves as good SDRs, but also, they showed good introspection, right? So that they could sort of listen to their own calls. Here we're self-critical. Know how to coach themselves. That's really an important type of mindset.
Absolutely, problem solve.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're really, and I think a lot of people have talked about this, but we've really found it too, is that we want coaches who aren't the type that are just going to come in and we're necessarily the best SDRs, right? The best SDRs can be good coaches, but not always the case, because sometimes the best SDRs just have a great way of doing it, and they want to tell everybody that this is the way to do it. And, I think the best coaching, and we've seen a lot of people write about this and talk about it, and we've seen it in action, is really the coaches who can ask just great questions. And they can hear something and they can just probe about it, and they can get that, and even better, they can get the SDR to probe themselves and be introspective and come up with the solution themselves, or be able to highlight the issue themselves. And so it's sort of that guide almost in those sessions. And so those folks who have that mentality, who have that type of ethos, really make the best coaches at our organization.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's, and this is, I think, what's sort of missing in so much of coaching these days, is it's so directive and not problem solving. So you tell me, right? What's the problem here?
Yeah.
What's the challenge for you in solving this problem? What can I do to help you? As opposed to, hey, just fix this for me.
Yeah. One last point too on that, because I think the other thing that's important, that's really tough, as coaches, is also helping to try to prioritize, because you can oftentimes in a call hear a lot of things that could be better, right? And you might have a rep who hears all those things and says, "Oh, here's all the things I'm going to change," but in a weekly cadence, you really want them to evaluate and think about the most important thing that they want to work on,
right? And
really trying to walk out of that meeting with almost, we call it, the one thing that they're going to work on for the week.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. The one thing. So just last point I wanted to bring up, because I thought it was a great recommendation too, especially in this day and age with all of the messaging with tools we have and so on, is that you said sometimes a quick 10-minute meeting can resolve what 10 emails cannot. I think that's great insight. It's, sometimes just, as you mentioned before, just pick up the damn phone and call somebody and let's take care of it, as opposed to, I've got Slack, let's do 20 Slack messages. Yeah,
and then you can go in a circle, and then you bring somebody else in. It's like kind of crazy how you can have miscommunication when, if you just get somebody on the phone, and here's the key thing when you get them on the phone, because you can go off course, is very clearly outline what is the issue that we're going to solve in this 10-minute call and try to stick to it, right? So I'm calling you because we need to solve this, and then you can go at it and you can get it done so much more quickly and come up with a better solution if you do it over the phone.
Great. All right. Well, David, unfortunately, we've run out of time, but tell people how they can connect with you and learn more about SalesRoads.
Yeah, so you can visit us at salesroads.com. That's our website, but also would love people connecting with me on LinkedIn, just David Kreiger, Kreiger on LinkedIn. Please just, connect with me, shoot me a message. Love to talk to folks. If you have any questions on remote work or SDRs, love to engage with people and speak that way too.
Great. David, thanks a lot.
Thanks for having me, Andy. It was great speaking to you.
Likewise. Okay, friends, that's it for this episode. First of all, I want to thank you for taking the time to listen. I'm so grateful for your support of our show. And I want to thank David Kreiger for sharing his insights with us today. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to this podcast, Sales Enablement with Andy Paul, on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. If you could also leave us a rating or review and let us know how we're doing, we'd appreciate it. You can do all that on your phone in less than a minute as soon as this podcast is over. So thanks for your help. Thank you so much for investing your time with us this week. Until next time, I'm your host, Andy Paul. Good selling, everyone. RingDNA is the leading sales enablement platform that uses AI to help scale business growth. Trusted by the top companies across the globe, RingDNA offers a suite of powerful tools for every sales role. The RingDNA Dialer radically improves sales productivity and call connection rates, while guided selling helps reps know exactly what to do and when to do it. Conversation AI uses artificial intelligence to surface the most impactful coaching opportunities in real time. So, no matter where your team is working from, the RingDNA platform can help them exponentially increase call connections, opportunities, and revenue. Learn more at ringdna.com/platform. That's ringdna.com/platform.